Hello everyone! So this is a short video that assumes that you've taken a look at the 4 sample cover letters. So if you haven't done that yet, you should go ahead and do so because I'm not going to read them out loud. I'm just going to go over what I think works well in the first two and where the other two kind of make some perhaps missteps. So as noted in our other class documents, this first cover letter is mine. And I think it works pretty well. It doesn't do anything fancy. If you've read it, you know this. It's essentially 4 very short paragraphs. So this is an incomplete cover letter in that there are things in this first paragraph that have not yet been filled in. So I just have a dear editors as my salutation. Again, if you know who an editor is, you can include their actual name. The one thing to be careful about is the worst thing you can do in that situation is accidentally address the letter to someone who no longer works there at that magazine. So just beware of that. So then when I would use this cover letter, I would fill in the title of my own work, the publication information, and then I would put in the word count. And remember, if they don't ask for a word count or a length requirement, I would just delete that sentence. Then I've got a first-person biography that's pretty simple, tells them where I have my degrees from, what work I've done, where my work has appeared. Again, if you don't have any of that stuff, just leave it out. You can just put something else about yourself. Again, something that's not particularly overly strange. Then I have my third paragraph, which indicates that this is a simultaneous submission. Obviously, if I'm submitting somewhere that doesn't take simultaneous submissions, I would not have this paragraph, and I would either just not mention it, or I would say that I have not submitted it elsewhere. And then I have just a thank you for considering my work. I look forward to hearing from you, and my name. So pretty straightforward, fairly simple, and I think pretty effective. As far as I can tell, I've never had a journal not want my work because of what's in my cover letter. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So like I said, these last 3 are real cover letters that I've received from prospective submitters. I have changed their names. And any information that is overtly identifying has also been changed. But otherwise, this is quite literally what these writers have submitted. So I thought this first one is perfectly fine. They identify the title of their poem. They've put it inside M dashes, but that's kind of their choice. It doesn't really matter. And this sort of innocuous statement is perfectly fine. I don't know if this person has actually reviewed content of our magazine, but I have no reason to believe they didn't. So that's perfectly fine. They have very simple biographical information, mentioned a couple of magazines that has published their work, and then an accolade that they received, and then another sort of thank you in advance for your consideration. All perfectly well and good. So this is an example of one of those cover letters that doesn't stand out, but that's, like I've said before, kind of what you want the cover letter to do. You don't want to stand out because you're really probably, your cover letter is only going to stand out if it's doing something bad. So again, 3 paragraphs if you want to count this last bit as a paragraph, whether or not, but then so there's 2 very simple content paragraphs. Notice they don't describe their poem, they just say thank you for considering this poem for inclusion. Okay, so those both work I think pretty well. So now let's take a quick look at a poem, or not a poem, I'm sorry, a cover letter that perhaps doesn't work as well. So here's the issue with this 1 paragraph cover letter. It doesn't really tell me anything about the poem, at least in terms of its name. I don't really get the sense that there's a letter with any sort of individuality to me. And really, just including the proper title of the journal will definitely give that level of personal appeal that you want. And this cover letter is just sort of strange in it's kind of waxing philosophical, as opposed to providing me with the kind of biographical information that's useful. Any information about their submission. So it's more, it's kind of this wandering, free-flowing thought process that doesn't really seem to go with how a formal cover letter should. And this is something I would also not say. I would not say previously I've only self-published a platform where the most important is blah, 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 blah. You don't need to tell me that you've only self-published. I wouldn't do that. I would leave that part out, because then as an editor, that makes me go, uh-oh, oh boy. There's nothing wrong with working with new writers. Most magazines are very excited about that prospect. We mean it when we say it, but you don't really want to draw attention to the fact that you have not had any work successfully published elsewhere, because it may give somebody who's reading your submission a sense of, oh, this isn't going to be very good. whether that's fair or not. So I would just be careful about that. So that's kind of what's wrong here. It's a little just too loosey-goosey, waxing poetic about their poetry, as opposed to telling me professional, useful things. And then we come to our fourth and final cover letter, and what you may have noticed is this doesn't really look like a cover letter. This is a biography. If all that a journal asks for is a biography in the third person, this is a perfectly fine thing to do, but my magazine specifically asks for an actual letter. What this ends up doing is, one, it means that you're not really paying attention to the journal's requirements or requests, and two, it's just impersonal. It's sort of just shoving a biography at somebody without even bothering to say hello. I mean, you expect a magazine to take the time to read and consider your work, but you're not actually sort of engaging in a communicative way. So avoid doing this. The other thing about this biography is it's a little heavy-handed. This list is just a little too long for how many things you're going to include. If you've been published several times, that's great, but you don't need to put a huge list. You should maybe list 4 or 5, maybe half a dozen places that you've been published or things that you've won, and just say, and others, rather than giving a humongous list like this. It's a little bit, it indicates sort of a bit of self-aggrandizement that you want to avoid. So I would have cut this cover letter down, this list down in this cover letter to about half the length that it is. Because you just don't want to sound a little too high and mighty on yourself. You should be very proud of any publications that you get, but you don't need to give them, the publisher, a full list of everything. But really, at the end of the day, the bigger problem with this is it's not a letter. It's a biography, as opposed to hello, thank you for considering my work, which is just professionally courteous thing to include. So I hope these examples have helped you see what you should and shouldn't do. Obviously, there are a whole lot of other things that you can do. And so the two letters that we've looked at that I think work well are not the only way to do things. And trust me, the problems that are in the second two letters are not the only problems you might encounter. But hopefully this has given you some idea of what the do's and don'ts that you want to look for and not look for are. So, there is a forum where you can ask questions, and then your assignment for this week, should you choose to accept it, is to take the time to try writing a cover letter for yourself, and I'll give you some feedback on how it's going. Alright, thanks everybody.